to understand what the Sangha community was about internally, we have to look at the realizational teaching, what they call adhigamadharma, consisting of the 8 branches of the Noble Eightfold Path, which 8 branches themselves again are divided into the 3 higher educations, although to distinguish it from our version of grad school, I like to call them super educations. So that's what they were doing. Take a look at the diagram of what's called the Textual Dharma and the Realizational Dharma. And let me say this, the word for realization or understanding, adhigama in Sanskrit, literally means going over. So the word that indicates a new understanding is a motion word. It's not a static word like our English understanding, which I think comes from our authoritarian culture where understanding something means you're obeying some authority or you're indoctrinated in some doctrine. But in their case, understanding, adhigama, means you go over into a new character of your own. You change your own self and you go into a new world, a new context through your understanding or through your realization. And it transforms you to understand the world differently. It's not, you don't just understand some authority's description of it. You have a realization of its true nature. So now here we have the textual collection has the 3, what are called the 3 baskets in the case of Theravada. And same, Mahayana, same. And you have the Vinaya is the discipline, not only of the monks, but also of lay people, the ethical discipline. And this is connected to the practice of ethical action, of realization of a new level of ethical being. The sutra discourses, which are the Buddha's own monologues or teaching sermons or speeches, then they connect to psychological and contemplative science. And then finally, the Abhidharma, which is kind of systematized scientific analysis of reality, especially internal reality, but also external reality. This corresponds to the realization of wisdom, which is the actual experience of the true nature of reality. Wisdom goes with knowledge. So it's like education where you seek knowledge, but you don't seek knowledge as just some external thing of a set of information that you can recite or you can list on your computer. Knowledge has to become experiential and realized to become wisdom. And that's what the goal is in the scientific level of the Buddhist super education. Okay? So this is on the scheme that you have, that you can see on the screen next to me. So these are the practices. Now, the Eightfold Path, which are leading to this higher education. The first one of them is called the right view, usually by people. But I don't really like right because they are approaching, this term comes from translators previously considering Buddhism to be a religion which had to have truths and rules which you had to follow. And when you follow a rule, you're either right or wrong because you're following a rule. But I like to translate the words samyak and mithya as realistic and unrealistic, because they, instead of following rules in a way, they are practices seeking to bring the individual who practices them into an improved experience of reality, not necessarily into just improved conformity to a set of rules. Because the goal of the education is to make a being know what reality is, since Buddha's discovery is that reality is good, it's great, it's nirvana. So the more you know reality, the happier and the better person you will be. So Buddha declared reality to be in itself transformative and liberating when accurately understood. First, we can see that nowadays, those who deny the reality of planetary overheating, as I prefer to call it, are wrecking themselves, and us actually, along the way. And those who are realistic are ready to change their way of being, to adapt to a reality that cannot be avoided. So being realistic leads to happiness in that case, for sure. And being unrealistic leads to destruction and doom and mega fires, and floods and heaven knows what. So, sorry for the digression. First, realistic worldview. That's the first one. And this involves, that's interesting to note. Note that that's the first branch, not meditation, as people often think Buddhism is just meditating. But first, it's realistic worldview, which you could also translate as belief or outlook. And it involves philosophical and scientific exploration of reality, really metaphysics, comparing it to what one's cultural and social conditioning has brought one up to believe is real. That is, what is the world? What is oneself as a human? Whence does one come? Where is one going? Why should one care? What are space and time? What are matter and mind? Life and death? Misery and happiness, etc. The fundamental intellectual insight toward which one is given rational means of validating or invalidating is that of relativity, expressed in the famous teaching of emptiness or voidness or selflessness, often misunderstood in Asia as well as in the West as nothingness, which actually means, but that's not what it is, emptiness, it is, or selflessness, it actually means that all things and beings are empty, devoid, free of any non-relational essence, component, or substance, or identity, hence completely relative to everything else. So, like me, Bob Thurman, there's no absolute Bob Thurman inside that's unconnected to all of the Bob Thurman interconnections and relations. And therefore, I'm 100% right to the core, to the heartbeat, to the central atom, or subatomic dissolving, whatever it is in there. It's all relational, 100%. That's what selfless means. That means that myself lacks a fixed self. It's a relative self. It doesn't mean I don't exist, right? I am stuck with existing, unfortunately, sometimes, when I'm in pain anyway. Hence, completely relative to everything else. Pursuing with various means, on various levels, this, what is called the royal reason of relativity. All things lack intrinsic reality or objectivity or identity, because they are all only relationally established. This enables one to critique the numerous dogmas of all human cultures, East, West, South, North, based on irrational, incoherent proclamations of absolutes of various kinds, absolute gods, absolute laws, absolute realities, absolute selves, absolute authorities. Developing this realistic worldview, therefore, basically means becoming increasingly open-minded, dedicated to confronting reality, however elusive and complicated, directly and perceiving and perseveringly. Of course, worldview understood intellectually presents reality as a target for experience, and one naturally becomes motivated to experience it viscerally as well, in case it would be possible. And this is something very unique about Indian inner science, not specifically Buddhist even, but Indian inner science, which is that science, for example, our modern scientists tell us that right now, like my body, is made up of atoms, and even the quantum people, subatomic particles, string theories, 11 dimensions, all kind of completely inconceivable things. I think I'm sort of solid flesh and blood. But they tell me that realistically, scientifically, I'm all of these things. However, we all assume I can't experience myself that way. I'm going to inevitably experience myself in a way that I'm not. I think I'm solid flesh and blood, but X-ray machine goes right through it. And, they could throw me into an encyclotron and I would blow up, and they might even not find a Higgs boson in here. So this, but in Indian science, if I am made of such atoms, if I am made of such subatomic particles, if even you can't find an essential subatomic particle that does not dissolve under analysis, then I should be able to experience that. To really validate it, ultimately, it has to be experimentally validated by experience, not just by inference, but judging by some mathematics or some indirect evidence, but direct evidence of experience. It should be, that's the inner science. And they claim that they saw the divisibility of all atoms and the fact of there being no indivisible particle against the normal Indian, other kinds of Indian physicists, the Buddhists themselves claimed, by mental focus and a mental atom smashing through highly concentrated mental processes. And this, of course, we don't know. This is where, of course, meditation becomes really important. But it is just but at this stage, let's just say it's a canon of the realistic worldview quest, which is a scientific quest to discover the nature of reality. And the intellectual, reasoned, sort of intellectual template of what that should be, rationally speaking, is critical before you engage in meditation. Because otherwise, meditation can just simply emphasize a distorted idea that you may have. So your analytic openness is essential before you meditate, so you won't get stuck fanatically on some distorted idea. Okay, I think that's clear. So now, once we have this realistic worldview, we then go to the second branch, which is realistic life purpose, you could call it, or realistic motivation in life. So here, you come to want to make informed decisions about lifestyle and purpose based on the discovery of a rationally validatable reality as explored. Given what it seems most sensible that the world and oneself is in reality, what is the most meaningful way of using this human life and intelligence I possess at this moment, and into various possible futures? At this point, many of the people who met Buddha and heard his teachings decided they would most usefully dedicate themselves to discovering the reality he had discovered and using the precious opportunity of the human life form to do so. They would then tend to want to become mendicants, given that the Indic societies of the time had the surplus of food, manpower, woman power, space, and resources to sustain their lives on a minimal basis while they pursued their educational goals, without providing any direct productive benefit to the collectives other than individualistic self-improvement. This is a really important point, and why, we are understanding the Buddha as a founder really of an education system rather than the founder of a religion, and why Max Weber couldn't fit him into the category of prophet, where he put Jesus and Muhammad and etc., other founders of religions. Because it's really not just believing something alone is not going to help, is what Buddha's view is. It's a re-education that is required. And he didn't have, universal school system in India at the time. And people were apprentices of their parents, whatever the father's production. If he was a king, you had to be a prince and a king. If he was a woman, you had to be a mother and a housekeeper like the mother. If he was a priest, you had to learn to do a bunch of rituals. If he was a merchant, you learned to do business. So you only learned as apprenticeship, so to speak. Then only a few dropouts would go out in the forest and live with the tigers to try to learn something about themselves, but it couldn't become a mainstream thing. So by creating this institution, he created the root of a mainstream re-educational thing where the individual, irrespective of their role in society, that they might, following the path of their parents, would develop their full understanding and awareness of the nature of reality. Isn't that what we're trying to do in our natural science departments, in our social science departments, in humanities departments? I guess we're studying people who tried to discover reality and looking at psychological reality through literature. So in other words, lifelong education is really what the Mendicant thing is about. And that was a way of getting lifelong scholarship. And we notice by student indebtedness nowadays that supposed individualistic modern societies are not likely to grant lifelong free lunch and scholarship to people, even today. So imagine how difficult it was in ancient time, where you're closer to subsistence in livelihood, to get kings and authorities in societies to grant free lunch to everybody who wanted to truly pursue self-liberation, self-realization, self-understanding, self-transformation. Not easy at all. But that's what the Buddha's revolution, that's what the cool revolution by the Buddha and by the Sangha community, that's what it was.